Hello, rail friends. Welcome to the Railfan Podcast. I'm Casey. We have switched roles. Mike is behind the camera this time. Mike wanted me to do the interview probably because I have no idea what we're doing or where we are. So it's going to be the easiest interview. I've got Brian here. He's from the Cowan Museum. We're going to be talking about the Cowan Museum history today, what's coming up at their events that are coming up close by, and it's going to be a great day to discuss and look, and hopefully, if the weather holds, we're even going to get some aerial footage from the drone. So you might hear a horn come by in a moment. That's going to be the pushers coming back by, which is one of the reasons why we like to come to Cowan. In the Heritage compilation that we did for CSX, you actually see the pushers come by, and the Chessie Systems is actually on pusher duty that day for some reason. So it's a cool thing because they help push, they assist going over the grade that's on the mountain right next to us. So Brian here from Cowan Museum, I believe you're on the board for the Cowan Museum.
Yes, I am. I'm on the board of directors as the secretary.
Right on. So we have a board member from the museum here. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the museum and also of this building and of the line, etc.?
Well, we would have to go back to 1965. That was an unfortunate timing when the railroad actually quit its passenger service through here. So right at that time, railroad decided, well, we'll just let maintenance way use this building, for whatever they need to do as far as, paperwork, track work and all that. Well, that went from 1965 to 1971, and in 1971 there was another decision that was made. Well, they decided, they're going to close it up because they saw no use out of the building. And it wasn't too much longer after that they decided, the building has no purpose of even being along the tracks. They wanted to tear it down. Well, as soon as somebody heard what they were planning on doing, there was a group that got together here in town called the Cowan Beautification Project. And the goal was to save this building. So they approached the railroad and say, hey, we would like to save this building. It's been a key part of the town's history. I mean, it's been here since 1904 when it was first built. So it's been a pure gem for this town. So they bought it from the railroad for dirt cheap. But here was the problem, and this goes for anybody that comes to visit the museum. There's a big picture that would tell the story. It sat next to the main line. The problem for them to preserve the building, with it sitting next to the main line, it posed a safety hazard. So the agreement was it had to be moved. So in a matter of a few years, they managed to gather up money of fundraisers, yard sales. They even had the city's bicentennial a year early to commemorate, 1976 coming around, of our July 4th independence. Well, they actually raised more money. So it was decided the following year in 1976, it was time to move it. They contracted with a trucking company that brought 2 modified trailers. All they had to do was dig underneath the building and basically fit these trailers underneath. In one whole day on September 21st, 1976, they moved it to its present location where it's been sitting today. It took them another 3 years of fixing anything in this building to fit it to make it a museum. And officially in 1979, they opened it up, and Cowan Railroad Museum has been here since then.
There you go. So we're filming this in 2024. You may be seeing it in a different year, but that was about 50 years ago that they relocated this museum. What became the museum, they relocated this depot. And so it was on the other side of the tracks, right? And
yes,
then
it was.
They moved it to this side. So I guess it would have been slightly closer to where the parking area and all is now on that side?
It would actually be, for anybody that comes to visit the town, we have what is Franklin County's replica of the first courthouse. It's actually where it used to sit at. So It was more closer, than where the road is at on the other side.
Okay, those are very close in. So that's a cool thing. It's not every day that they move it and preserve the history. A lot of times they're just kind of reused as event spaces like they are in Dalton, which is of course the visitor center, etc. But it's neat, they kept this and now it's a museum. And I'm going to cheat because it's printed on the wall over there, and we'll show you here. But it was the Nashville and Chattanooga from 1845 to 1873, and then it changed to the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis line from 1873 to 1957. Good long run serving that line, and we know there's a heritage for that on CSX, so that's really cool. Then there's the L&N, which was from 1957 to 1982, the year that they made me, which was a great reason to change. to the Seaboard system from 82 to 86, and then it has been CSX since 1986. So even within my lifetime, it's served two different railroads that have come through here. So really cool. There's a lot of history in this museum. I strolled through before we started. They have a working model of an old Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis locomotive, which is here. It's really, really cool. They have some history on how they communicated with the telegraph system, etc., the phones. And you can see the bay window where you can look out on the tracks. It's just a really cool spot. It's got some great rail history here. Now, about the history of the museum, you guys do events and such on a regular basis, right?
Yeah, yearly we have our Fall Heritage Festival, which always takes place the third weekend of September. We've actually had our 11th anniversary that just happened just this past weekend. We had sold out vendors, we had live music, we actually had a very good turnout, and the weather was just absolutely perfect, even though it was a bit hot. But people were willing to come inside and see all the displays that we had in here. We've gotten a lot of great remarks. There was even a few ex-railroaders that came in here and they were astounded about how this museum is. And I personally got to talk with a few of them, and more than likely they're going to be spreading the word, for other people to come and see this.
And that's the idea. That's part of why we wanted to come do this. This is a great spot. We are always watching what's coming through Cowan, because that eventually makes its way to Chattanooga on the southbound. So it's great to have this here and have so many rail fans and rail friends of the Rail Moments channel that are located here in Cowan. Great spot for rail fanning and a great place to come and visit. Lots of good restaurants. And as the grade comes through, so the pushers are a unique thing. Let's talk a little bit about the pushers.
Of course.
So I know they're here to push the grade, but where are they going and how steep is that grade?
Well, basically, they were mostly based here in Cowan, and the story that starts is 1853, after the main line was first laid, a year after the tunnel's completion. So they were running the first revenue train on south, trying to make it down to Stevenson. Well, apparently about halfway up, and of course, for anybody that comes to the museum, this is what I always tell them, the amount of grade it is. It is 2% grade. They ran the first revenue train up, and about halfway up, it stalled. Railroad officials and railroad workers were trying to come up with solutions, and one of them came up with, well, why don't we just bring another locomotive down, put it on the back end of this train, push it up the rest of the way, and see if we can go the rest of the way where it needs to go. Well, they succeeded in that, and after that, railroad officials made a decision, well, we're just going to keep a set of pushers here, and this actually became known as the Cowan Pusher District.
So now, even in the days when everything is a 4,400 horsepower engine with immense tractive power, they're still using pushers to make the 2% grade. And it's not on every train, but on the trains that are a heavier load.
Yeah, it's certain trains that are over tonnage. As far as the grade goes, you have 2 miles of 2% grade on this side of the tunnel, but on the other side is more like 7 miles. So the tunnel is actually the crest of it. And once they get on the other side, it's a straight drop, until they get into the town of Sherwood. So for any train that is over tonnage, CSX always calls it in and says, hey, they're going to need a push. They will send the pushers on ahead, wait for the train to come in from the Chattanooga direction, and they would actually get on the back end of it in Sherwood and push it the rest of the way up, to get through here.
And then you see the pushers retreat. That's pretty often. We have footage of that, of the chassis systems running backwards, going back to return after doing its pusher duty. So a really neat thing to see. You see them come in, then you see them on the back of the train, and then you see them retreat. And this is one of those things you can see right here. There's also a great little gazebo outside. There's a lot of great spots to do rail fanning. It's a very open shot. One of the things that Mike loves to film here is there's a lot of open room with grass, not a ton of trees, nothing you have to weed whack through. And so it's great to be able to see from this spot both directions. There's a crossing here, there's signal lights. There's a lot to be able to see as a rail fan. Even if you're not in here while the museum's open, you should come and check out Cowan, but do make a special trip to see it in the museum or the museum's current hours. And I think you don't run year round, right? There's a season?
Yeah, we run May through October, and our open days are Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, and the hours will be 10 to 4. Sundays are a shorter day, it's 1 to 4.
There you go. And so if you come and check it out, make sure you come during those times, and then you can rail fan the rest of the day. You can walk through the museum and see the history of the place. So I understand you actually have a yard here in Cowan. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the yard itself was built, it was actually to service both the Huntsville branch, which used to be in service up until 1985. It also serviced the Tracy Cedar branch for its local. It was more of, the interchange point, for any rail cars that were coming from either direction for mainline trains to pick up. Back in the day, it was also a fuel stop for the steam trains. There was a working coal tower and a water tower, and as a matter of fact, this picture right here was actually one of the ones that was taken inside the yard of a train on its fuel stop. So it was a pretty busy place back then.
And as we know, steam locomotives needed a lot of water, not only a lot of coal, but a lot of water. So it's an important thing, especially with the grade coming up. They were going to have to be running high power. So it's a good thing to have this as a particular vantage point, and it continues today. There's still a strategic reason to have the yard, to have the pushers. So a lot of those same reasons from back then carry through railroading to the current era. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening inside the museum. Since we know our rail friends are going to want to come see this when it's open, let's talk about a couple of your favorite exhibits. I know you're familiar with it. What do you love about this place?
Well, there's just a lot of good artifacts, and anytime I get a tour group that comes in here, right behind Mike, we have our mannequin that's basically representing the station master. And I basically remark, well, that's just our grumpiest employee that's here. But
he doesn't talk back much, so there's that.
No, but there is a funny story that goes along with it. A while back, while I was working tours here, we actually had one of those very gentlemen that actually worked that very position. He lives somewhere outside of town here, so he made a stop here one day and remarked that he worked in here. So, of course, me, being the train nut as I am, well, I had a lot of questions, to ask him. Well, he was a busy person, and he gave me, a lot of detail what he was doing back in the day. And not only he was handling the train orders, he'd help out with the mail, he was stamping tickets. I mean, very busy person. So it gave me an insight, to what it's like working inside the passenger depot back in the day. Between that and we also have a working model railroad layout in the back there, or as I call it, the kids' favorite room. For anybody that brings their families in there, as soon as the kids see that room, they just fly right in there. Because why? Because they want to see the train. So it's pretty unique in the way there, the way it was built, starting in the early '80s. It actually used to be the mail room. Now, when one of the founding members, when they first opened this up, saw that the room was empty, gave the idea of, well, why don't we just put a train layout in here? Took him a few years to build it, and it's loosely based of the main line from Cowan to Sherwood. So it's kind of a neat little exhibit in a way there, and it kind of gives you a little idea of where everything could be at. Latest edition that we had on there, and was done by the late Tom Knowles. He had added the Gauge or Lime Company. They was a major employer in Sherwood up until 1949. So that little addition was made in there, and it kind of gives everybody the idea of, well, what all was in there. And one of all the questions I was always asked about is there's a certain building in there which is still standing today of what it used to be. Well, of course, that's Monterey Station. What it used to be back in the day was the General Shoe Company, or Genesco for short, which was to manufacture shoes. This was actually one of two areas that they were manufacturing shoes before they combined everything to move, to a different location.
So a lot of shoes shipped out of this building.
Oh, yes.
So there were, of course, passengers, but also I imagine a fairly heavy freight distribution with shoes, I'm sure, leather and things coming in. So there are two questions I'm going to have is, so on the diorama back there with the scale train, which side of the tracks is the depot on?
It would actually be on the other side.
See, there you go. And that's an important detail. If you want to see the history, just come and look at their scale train layout. Also, what scale is it?
That's HO scale.
There you go. So HL Railroad fans, come and check it out. They got a great layout, and it actually goes a little bit through the wall as you come and see it. You can actually see it from both sides. And if you see me looking off camera as we're doing this interview, I'm actually looking back at the bay window that has the old telegraph station there. You can see the ticket window. So the guy, he was saying, was multitasking. Yeah, so he's taking tickets. There's a window over there. There's the telegraph. He's part-time postmaster. I'm sure he's also freight manager. He's doing all those things, and you can still see all of that here. There's a window that goes through the wall, and it's obviously a ticket window. Everything is very preserved, and you can see the history of how this was. It was just the other way around.
Another interesting thing that we have is actually our rolling Smithsonian exhibit. Back some years ago, the Smithsonian exhibit came here, did a display at Monterey Station. We actually did our own little addition to it. For those that go in the middle room there, we actually got some photos that were taken back in the day, right around the tunnel, even around the depot there. One of the most interesting photos was taken in 1949. It was the GM's Train of Tomorrow, which actually made a stop here. And you figured this is right at the height of steam that they were advertising this train, because back then, railroads were looking to transition from steam to diesel, for mechanical purposes and economical purpose. So they were basically advertising it, what it's like to see an internal combustion locomotive. So kind of a neat little picture at that, plus you see how everybody is kind of crowded around there. It's like, seeing something from like the space age, if I was to reference it.
And remember, in the days before the internet and when newspapers weren't printed in color, this is in the era of the World's Fair. This is in the presence of all the car shows, and GM was investing heavily in doing all of these experience things to bring people who were maybe outside the major cities who didn't have all this contact, let them see what was coming, get everybody excited around it. And I'm sure the engines were produced by GM at the time, big diesel engines. So to have this presence come through, it's a neat thing that it was on this stop. That's cool.
Oh yeah.
And I had no idea. So GM invested a whole lot into their shows at that time. Let's talk a little bit about the static display outside.
Well, as we can start out, we'll start with old number 1, which is a 242 locomotive that was built in 1920 by the Porter Locomotive Company. It was actually built for the Big Brick Company of Macon, Georgia. It's actually one of 5 that was built. Now, when you look at it outside, it actually wasn't built that way. It was a saddle tank locomotive. So it was built along with its sisters, and hauling bricks, from one area to another, for the process. Now, that was sometime later on, it was retired along with the sisters, because back then, steam was, costly to keep maintained. Well, the next owner that found it, and we do have photos of this near our back door there, when the next owner found it, well, it was in pretty sad shape. The saddle tank itself was gone off it, and the cab was pretty much rotted out. Cab was made of wood. So in order for him to make it work, he basically had to refit it with a whole new cab, and he had to custom a tender with it. Now, the tender itself dates from the mid-1800s, so it's much older than the locomotive itself. Well, it took him some years to restore it, and by the time all was said and done, he was able to run excursions with it in Charleston, South Carolina. And as a matter of fact, the National Railroad Historical Society had an event there at one time that this locomotive was featured in. Well, right at that time they was supposed to run it, well, it ran into a mechanical issue, so he ended up just parking it, and they did a photo op with it, which we got one of those hanging up. At that time, it was getting costly for him to maintain it, so he sold it to its next owner, which happened to be the Tennessee Railroad Museum, who was planning on wanting to restore it. Well, right at that time, they were sinking their money heavily into, the locomotives they already had, and they happened to look at this, and they said, nah, it's, it wouldn't be even worth it. Well, when they heard about our museum coming to be in the late 70s, they offered it to us as a good static display, which we accepted. It was actually trucked up here by rail. And of course, this is when the little storage area was just right next to where the depot now sits. They were able to pull it in and use a crane to lower it onto the new track that was built. So it's been here since then. A lot of kids love the display here. Attached to it, right behind it, is actually a car that's actually more known to Cowan itself. It was actually the tunnel car, which we do have a picture of it in the middle room there. I used to have the scaffold on it, and that was what they maintained the tunnel with. So it used to be staged up in the yard back in the day.
Now it's a big flatbed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see it right out the window there. It's right behind the bay window. If you come and see it, it's directly behind the tender. And it's a neat thing to see. So I'm assuming when they transported this in, you said they brought it in by rail, but I'm guessing it was wheels off, lowered onto a flat car. As if it had to come through the tunnel, there's not a whole lot of clearance, right?
Yeah, not a whole lot of clearance.
Yeah. So another part of the static display that's here is the caboose. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that has actually got a very interesting story to itself, which I'm willing to share. That caboose actually started out as a wooden boxcar back when it was built in the 1910s, for the railroad. And it serviced up until sometime in the 1950s, and the railroad was in need of more cabooses, I would put it. Well, they selected that and fixed it with a bay window caboose, which makes it just one of those things that you don't see it all that often as far as a bay window caboose, because a lot of railroads have built them out of steel, such as the B&O and other railroads that have had them. Well, this being a wooden-based bay window caboose, this was pretty unique. This is actually one of two that exists. Its sister is actually just about a half hour north of here and sitting on somebody's property. But what's really neat about the history of that, it was actually used by a well-known musician by the name of Minnie Pearl. She would actually use it just to kind of ride from one place to another on rails just west of Nashville, to make appearances at shows. So that kind of adds a little interesting history to it as far as that caboose goes.
And to help that stick in your mind, Pearl's is a restaurant just up the hill on top of the mountain. Probably no relation, but it's cool. That's a neat thing. So it's got a little bit of celebrity history. It's like Dolly Parton's tour bus back in the day, but it wasn't a bus. It was a traveling rail car, and it was very popular back then. People that had wealth and fame, they didn't really use luxury cars. They didn't buy Bentleys and things very often. A lot of times they would have rail cars, and they would just travel with that, because that rail had really changed the face of the country. Instead of taking weeks by horse and buggy to get across the U.S., you could do it in a matter of 14 days to get from New York to LA. So a lot of wealthy people that prioritized travel and going to see different things had their own rail cars, and why not have a cool little caboose?
Oh yeah.
Kind of fits Minnie Pearl's aesthetic. And so also there's a cam here. I know Mike loves the camera, and that's how we keep track of a lot of stuff. And he'll say on the lives it's going through Cowan. Sometimes that's Tony, sometimes that's Brian, sometimes that's other people giving us a heads up. A lot of times it's the great Cowan rail camera. So when did that get set up?
That was actually set up earlier this year. And it came up with an idea by a friend of mine by the name of Vince Webb, who wanted to do something more for this museum. Well, he also had another friend of ours who's also on our board of directors by the name of Don Davis, who had been wanting to put a cam on here, and he'd been telling us, left and right, hey, I have this cam, we need to put up. I was all for this idea. I figured this would be a great addition, for anybody that wanted to see the train action if they couldn't make it here. Well, with Vince's help, one day, that became, the very thing.
There we go. I think we know Don too. I think Don's actually got some ancestors that were in the 65th Infantry, and he is a big fan of the rail history, and he's a big fan of the 4501, so we know exactly who Don is. Don, you and I have never met, but I know who you are. So it's cool that he's on the board here. We know so many of the people here in Cowan, and that's a great resource. So one of the things we love about Cowan is not just the great vantage point and knowing what's coming down. It's also really well lit at night. That's a great spot. We love coming here. Mike's caught a lot of really good stuff here. It's just a great shot. It's a good angle, and we're really happy to have that. It's a great resource for us, speaking selfishly as Chattanoogan's, who don't necessarily have a lot of visibility for what's coming from the other side of Mount Eagle. Because for Chattanoogan's, we're almost like Metro Atlanta, right? It's a very easy thing to get the next major city that's Atlanta. But Nashville, that's on the other side of Mount Eagle Mountain, on the side where we are now with Cowan, you got to cross the mountain, and it's like a visual block. It's the other side of the planet to cross this mountain. And even though it's not really that far and it's a short drive, it's a change in time zone, it's going over the mountain, it's all these things, and it's so far away to us. It's like, oh wow, this coming down from Cowan, but in reality it's just going through the tunnel and coming right on down the line. It's just it's this odd little mental thing of, here it is, it's coming through the mountain. And so we're on the other side of it.
And what's neat about, I got a few stories to share of my own, especially catching trains here. There was one time in the middle of summer, this is about midnight, there's no traffic. And what was neat about it is if you get the right wind blowing, you can actually hear a train blowing all the way from Sherwood, which I thought was a really neat thing. And the other neat thing, before they redone the tracks back in 2014, when the old signal used to be here, is the way it stood out. If a train's coming, let's say you're sleeping in your car here and you're eager to catch something overnight, well, you walk down and to see a nice green signal, well, it gives you time to prepare, what else could be coming.
That's right. There's only a few options. And so there's a lot that's available here. Like we said, you've got the gates, you have the signals, you have all the things that Mike especially loves. And it's just a great spot for rail fanning. I know we keep repeating that, but we love the hidden gems. That's why we like taking you to places like Lula, Georgia, and going off the beaten path. And Cowan was one of those places off the beaten path where they really love their rail history. It's a well-known place for rail fans in this area, but it should be better known for people outside the area. You got your restaurants, you got facilities, you have a place to set up, you've got great sight lines, you have the unique vantage point, you have history. It's been in multiple lines throughout the years, and there's constant action. Actually, during the filming of this podcast, we've had 3 trains go by. So if sometimes there are cuts and we're looking at stuff outside or we're doing static displays, that's to cover up a cut because trains keep going by, which is a great thing if you're a rail fan. So also, you guys love your events here. I know this thing you do a lot. You got one coming up, and we'd love to give you the opportunity to shill for that event.
Of course. For anybody that's interested, October 19th, which would be the 3rd Saturday, I basically, especially if there's anybody on Facebook, look up the event, Cowan Railfan Day. This idea was inspired by Mike and the guys from Decatur, Alabama, known as the River City Railfan Club, that approached me about doing this event. Well, I said, well, why not? So I had to get in a conversation with our lead tour guide, who's here most of the time, when the days need to be opened up, and our museum president. They were all for this idea. So I figured, well, yeah, just be our own little event. Just enjoy trains for the day. You get to enjoy the museum. We also have a night photo session that's being hosted by Dylan Holvey, of photos being taken at night of number 1 and the NCNCNL 44 tonner that sits out back with the boxcar. So it's going to be a fun little event, for anybody that can make it here.
That's cool. I've seen some of Dylan's photos. They're very good.
Oh, very good.
It's cool to have a great night evening. And you know what? As you guys know, I'm usually in the studio. I didn't even know that Mike had anything to do with putting this idea in your head, so that's great. And if you guys are watching this later on, the date we're talking about is October 2024, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't come and check it out anyway, because there are events happening all the time. There's the Facebook group. So if you want to stay current with what's happening at the Cowan Museum, just get on the Facebook group and check out the events that are coming. So again, guys, there are restaurants close by. I'm about to go enjoy one with Mike. Actually, there's a Mexican restaurant he loves that's right around the corner. And I'm hungry because my stomach is on Eastern time. And it's an important thing. Cowan is on Central time. This confuses a lot of people in the Middle Tennessee area because the line for Central time goes straight through the middle of the state. It also confuses us who live here because there's fast time and slow time, as we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
There's also a lot of history. I was looking at a plaque over here earlier about the big hammer, a particular pusher that had actually exploded at one point that was pushing on the grade. There's just a lot of history, a lot of little stories, a lot of little personal tidbits. So as you go through, read the stories, look at the history, look at the photographs, because they're just little segments here that really tell a story about a building and about an area that's been here for 150 plus years. So great spot. We enjoyed it. Brian, thanks for having us out.
Yeah, thank you, Casey.
And I hope you guys enjoy an income experience for yourselves. So for Mike and Casey, Mike on that side of the camera this time, we appreciate you joining us, Rail Friends. If you hear some squeaks in the floors, that's because we're standing on the original wood floors here. Come and check it out. Experience the history for yourself because it's living rail history, and we appreciate you joining us for it.